The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
And welcome back again to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. Jason Bryant here with you from the friendly confines of New Brighton, Minnesota, as the renovation continues. Actually, we're in a bit of a pausing point. We don't have the plumbing and the electrical here yet, but yes, studio has been relocated, so that is again the reason why the shows are taking a little bit of a slow roll here in the month of August. Guess what? Who's coming on a future show? Yes, my 7-year-old daughter, Lucy Bryant, will be coming on the show. Yeah, if you're looking for a wrestling angle, you're not really going to find one. If this is your first time listening, trust me, you're coming across the show at a very, very odd time in my life. No, in all seriousness, today the topic is a question of the week that I posed on Twitter about wrestling fans' position on professional wrestling or sports entertainment. We'll touch on that in a minute. Before we get there, I'd like to thank Rusty Bourne and Wrestling with Character, two of the latest team members here at the Matt Talk Podcast Network. They're patrons. They can go to matttalkonline.com/contribute, where you can offer a one-time contribution like Tim Hess did. Thank you very much, kind sir. Or a monthly contribution, which gets you access to the Sandbox, the digital guides. And when I say Sandbox, that's my statistical database of stuff. I don't sell the data, but basically I give you access to where I get to play around with all my stats, facts, and figures. You know, Damon Martin, a MMA writer, actually reached out the other day. He actually had a question, or there was a question posed about Taylor Johnson, who wrestled at Southern Oregon. And the comment was, I'm not sure if he was a national champ. I know he was an All-American. I usually ask at Jason M. Bryant things like this. Sure enough, that's the flag. Yep, Taylor Johnson went 5-3-1 at Southern Oregon, NAI national champion 2015 at 197 pounds. Started his career at Oregon State. That type of access to information is available to you if you're at the $10 level of giving, and you get the digital preview guides, the Fargo Almanac, which will be updated here soon. Again, we've got a whole line of things to get through project-wise, not just with the studio, but with the Matt Talk Podcast Network. So much stuff on the plate, but again, guests coming up. With my daughter's been bugging me to be on the show. So my wife has been on the show before. Actually, that was one of the most listened to episodes. People got an introspective insight. I'm using that probably incorrectly. About how things work around here in the household. So right now, it's a Thursday on 8/8/2019. I'm a week away from going to Disney. Yes, I'm going to Disney World with my kids in the middle of August. I will be spending my 40th birthday at the Magic Kingdom. I cannot think of anything more magical than that. I have spent birthdays in Paris and Rio in the past several years. I've also spent a birthday in South Africa. That was 10 years ago. But that's what's coming up. I've got a couple questions of the week that I've got to fill out the show schedule. Joe Jamison, the recent hire at your sinus, pardon me, sir, was the most recent guest on the show. But here's what we've got today. To get right into it. The question I posed on July 25th, 2019 was, I've noticed in the past 10 years, less of the college and high school wrestling world scoffing at our athletes going the, air quotes, pro wrestling route. Some used to call it disgraceful. Now I rarely hear that word thrown around. I asked you your thoughts on why it's no longer viewed as taboo to our, again, air quote, fans. So I'm going to roll through these comments and give some of my commentary on them. I did some of this on Twitter. I answered this or asked these questions. Actually, the question I've got out right now is, what's your favorite All-Star Classic match? So if you respond to at Jason M. Bryant on Twitter, or drop me a line at jason@bryantwrestling.com, or use various types of, you don't want to send me a voice message or something, or whatever, that's fine. I will probably include it here in the show. So again, that is the show question for next week. What is your favorite All-Star Classic match of all time? We've already got some good feedback on that. Don't want to blow the surprise. But again, why is professional wrestling and sports entertainment no longer scoffed at by our wrestling community? Well, let's get to the comments. Dylan Ryan at Rhino84. He is one of the more doctoral members of our wrestling community on Twitter. He goes, people are more exposed to the individual athletes through social media and interviews, and people are seeing something like professional wrestling as a way to further that person's individual expression and personality. He goes on to say that he thinks seeing people like Jerry Briscoe's passion for these athletes, coaches, and teams, and looking at that aspect of the recruitment process and the job itself in a more positive light. He and others have helped change that stigma. Many of us athletes, of course, he was a college athlete at Duke, and parents also are fans during the explosion of professional wrestling, and some of us were inspired to take up wrestling because of the WWE or WCW. This has allowed us to see professional wrestling in a much more positive light. I grew up in an era in what was Crockett country, NWA country, the territory days. So I grew up not really knowing anything about high school and college wrestling or Olympic wrestling. Matter of fact, I didn't see my first ever Olympic match until 1996, during that Olympic Games in Atlanta. I didn't see my first high school match until the year before in 1995. Matter of fact, January of 95. So I was exposed to professional wrestling much earlier, and I attended, the events at the Hampton Coliseum, Bunkhouse Stampedes and Starrcade type events, that type of stuff. So I was exposed to it. So moving on. Kenny McKinney. I'm still a fan of the WWF Pro Wrestling from when I was a kid in the 5th grade, but when I started participating in collegiate wrestling in middle school, I couldn't take it entertainingly serious anymore. The Jackass show had higher physical stakes and no one ever actually competed. On that point, I kind of fell away from a fan myself, and then recently it was actually, I guess it was probably meeting Jerry Briscoe in the last several years and becoming friends with Jerry that I kind of rekindled that eye I had for it as a kid, and then a little bit into college. And then Conrad Thompson, if you're a pro wrestling fan, Conrad Thompson at Hey It's Conrad on Twitter has several professional wrestling podcasts that are not safe for work, and they really kind of, if you're a kid, you're kind of into that kind of thing, and it really does kind of tap into your inner kid, which is kind of cool to go back and listen to. I did ask Kenny if those shows have kind of rekindled his interest. He goes, not at all. If I figure WrestleMania is their Super Bowl, and if that can't do it for me, then as a former fan, I appreciate that they have a career more than I appreciate their sport. To me, it's just a big nostalgia bomb. Okay, hey, I don't think it's a wrong answer by any means. Vest DJ, of course, that's at _Vest DJ _ trailing underscore there. That's interesting. I think we know the athletes a lot better now than we did 20 years ago. We are more invested in seeing them succeed. I would have had no idea who Jacob Casper was in 2002, but thanks to social media and streaming, I know who he is and root for him to make it. Of course, that is a homage or a plug for another Duke reference here. Jacob Casper has made it abundantly clear that he does plan on going into the professional wrestling sports entertainment world following his run through 2020. Next comment comes from mrocked40. That's just at mrocked40. Kurt Angle brought legitimacy to it. All right. The question of bringing legitimacy to professional wrestling or sports entertainment. Okay, the sporting aspect of it, the athleticism, never been an issue about legitimacy. They are athletes. They are tremendous athletes. I don't know if having a real wrestler come in, and I use that term, I don't mean it pejoratively, but having an Olympic level wrestler come in brings legitimacy to professional wrestling. There have been Olympic level competitors and NCAA wrestling champions in professional wrestling for generations. There were legit guys, or as you'll hear Jim Ross or Bruce Pritchard say on their shows, legit badasses. They've been in professional wrestling for a while, so there's been legit wrestlers in there. I don't think Kurt Angle was the first one to bring legitimacy to it. Although, again, with the rise of a lot more cable networks and pay-per-views every week, maybe his crossover from 96 had a significant jump from maybe our fan base. But again, Angle was a guy who I thought we were still getting people that were just incensed that he would turn his back on wrestling, and he was a disgrace. Angle's really kind of the catalyst for this entire argument or this discussion. Moving on, Victor Sweet at @tack_James. I think the increased exposure of the sport has a lot to do with it. In the past, when people thought of wrestling, people immediately thought of pro wrestling and gave our sport a bit of a bad look. Now, with the increased exposure and the rise of MMA, it's not as much of an issue. Hard to argue that point, yes. I mean, the lines have been blurred a little bit. The fourth wall's been broken down. So, having competitive and combative outlets definitely have led to that. At Mateo, at Matthew Rafat, I far prefer WWE to UFC as a route for Olympic caliber wrestlers to earn money. But let's be clear, the WWE is very hard on the body and injuries are unfortunately common. I don't think that's just limited to the WWE compared to the UFC. Injuries are going to happen in any professional sporting event. We're talking about the lifespan of a professional football career. We're talking about, the constant bumps and bruises of the WWE. Yes, absolutely can take a toll on one's body. But again, combat sports athletes are used to this. I don't think it is something that is widely different from, we don't have the generations of data yet for, the mixed martial arts community to see what does a career of 50 fights do, or 30 fights, or maybe if you're just pick and choosing. I mean, a lot of guys have 50 fights. A lot of guys have 12. It's really strange how that works. I'm not an expert in MMA, so I'm kind of going to defer to say, okay, yeah, that's definitely, it's hard on the body. I mean, any professional sport's hard on the body. Kyle Dakes Proctologist, probably my least favorite troll account because you really need to do a better job. At Parachute Ranch. Okay, I'm just messing. I think sports have become specialized entertainment like football, basketball, and baseball, and others. More so than before on and off the field. With social media, personal persona, and the followers that come with it, wrestling fans realize that without a heel, we can't have a hero. Okay, well, yeah, that's some of it. It's comic book lifestyle. I mean, comic books aren't just for nerds anymore. And matter of fact, they were never just for nerds. There are a lot of closet nerds out there who read comic books and didn't want their comic book nerd friends to know they read comic books. Yeah, I think the same can be said about professional wrestling fans. There's a lot of people that were in our college and high school and Olympic level sport of wrestling that didn't like a lot of people to know they were professional wrestling fans. Blair Kelly at Herbalife with BK. I think I just gave him a plug there. I also think fans are realizing the only two ways wrestlers can make money, to make great money rather, is MMA or pro wrestling. Well, there's a lot of great ways. It's called, Dylan Ryan's going to be a doctor. I think that's a great way for a wrestler to make money. Use his education. So from a combative standpoint, yes, those are two great ways to make money. But you got to be good at both. It's a high level of excellence that's needed. You can't just, all right, I'm going to be a fighter. Okay, good luck at the convention center in an amateur MMA fight with a shady promoter. You've got to find the right stuff to make money. It's not just going to pop in there and be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go in there. There are avenues, yes. Kevin Baldinger and a number of people come through with just the money, ching, so no problem there. Cody's Mustache at Spink's Mustache. He always actually has a very sarcastic take on things because pro wrestling's awesome and fun, and only folks with highly limited intellect would think that it has anything to do with the amateur sport. Okay, you know what? There are still people who believe that the guys in the professional wrestling ranks can go over to the amateur wrestling ranks and do pretty well. There are people who believe this. I'm not saying that there's a ton of them, but there are people who believe this. Never underestimate the I don't know. Never mind. I'm going to go off on a tangent there. Northridge Wrestling. Money. That's a pretty good one. Kelly Heinecker at K.I. Heinecker. As we move on. I think a generation that grew up watching it is starting to be the crowd you hear from. They grew up on it and don't scoff at it. I think people are overall just supporting wrestlers out there making money for themselves. They support wrestlers making their mark in other areas because anytime a wrestler is successful, it puts the sport in a positive light. I agree with you. Look at how much coverage people like Kurt Angle, Daniel Cormier, Henry Cejudo have given the sport from their other sports ventures. Lastly, I think the depth of Team USA is another reason people are okay with it. In the past, the talent pool was shallow, and any athlete leaving was a detriment to Team USA. We are now so deep that it's easier to support the athletes that leave the system. Great point. Don't really have anything I can contend with on that. Josh D. Phillips at Josh Phillips, PhD. Smarty Pants here. Angle and Lesnar legitimized it. Two successful wrestlers use WWE to make money. There's no money really in wrestling. Or actually, his term is there is no money in real wrestling. Can't scoff at a gold medalist who got money post-real wrestling career. Again, I don't want to keep using that term real wrestling because, again, the issue is the term wrestling, not the term real because it's sports entertainment or pro wrestling. There's a clear difference. Anyway, back to what Mr. Phillips was saying. When real pro wrestling fell apart in 2 months, they tried RPW and it didn't work. I had to admit, WWE is good money long term. Yeah, it's good money long term. I mean, Angle has a 20-something year career at this point. Real pro wrestling, for its flaws, it did I wouldn't even say it lasted 2 months. It was one weekend television taping on a soundstage in LA. And then their season 2 was just a cluster. I know when I was living in Pennsylvania, I was going between a Drexel quad and the RPW season 2 like qualifier. It was strange. I mean, yeah. Jeremy Knott at JKnott86. Moneybags. Scott Campbell at JSC Bowhunter. $3 signs. So you're getting the understanding here. People are saying money, money, money. PD2, yes, Pat Downey Jr., that's PD3's dad. Besides MMA, what other avenue exists to becoming a multimillionaire combat sports athlete than pro wrestling? I bet Kurt Angle's bank account is not disgraceful. Multi-million-dollar, I mean, again, depends on the level of success. Angle is, I think, probably the anomaly from our world right now. I think there's definitely people that are going to go through there and make big-time seven-figure salaries or collect that much over a course of a career. Back to where I was talking about this. So I was sitting in Fargo, and this was really what kind of spurred the discussion. Sitting in Fargo, and I remember when Kurt Angle, it's a disgrace, it's a disgrace, it's a disgrace. I was arguing coaches about it was an opportunity to cash in, but it was also, he's making a living. Does he have to be a wrestling coach at work at UPS? Back in the AWA era, the territory days up here in Minnesota, the AWA is a big, big deal. Guys like Bischoff, speaks highly of his time in the AWA. People were fine with it. Vern Gagne is a guy who provided college and Olympic level wrestlers jobs in professional wrestling long before Kurt Angle was even a blip in the wrestling community's eye. He might have been born, but guys like Brad Rangans and all that. So Chris Taylor, before he passed on, these are guys that were wrestling with Vern Gagne. The Iron Sheik was a Greco-Roman wrestling coach in Minnesota. Khosrow Vaziri was training with the Minnesota Wrestling Club in Greco-Roman when Vern Gagne gave him a shot. So it's been generations that wrestlers have been giving wrestlers jobs. Now, I never understood, and actually it's kind of weird because when I moved here to Minnesota, there was never that issue about people saying, it's just, I never heard it here in Minnesota. Professional wrestling has actually been part of the culture here so much that it's like, okay, you're going to go UFC? Cool. Oh, you want pro wrestling? Oh, cool. No biggie. Never really was a big deal out in Minnesota, apparently. Julia Salata, always quick with an opinion. Straight up, pro wrestling is what made me want to do real wrestling. Again, there's the word real again. I loved The Undertaker and Kane as a kid. I knew it wasn't the same thing, but it's what got my interest. Oddly enough, Kane spoke at King University's commencement last year. King is where Julia coaches. Earl of Tom, that's Earl Smith from The Open Mat. Lost interest when I was away to college in the late 90s, early 2000s when I was at the NCAAs a few years ago. Got to spend some time with me and Jerry Briscoe. It kind of rekindled it for me. Now my 10-year-old and I bond over WWE. There's Jerry Briscoe again. Jerry Briscoe, you're getting some love here. Mason Beckman at Beck Diggity. You know him from Lehigh. I think wrestling fans have become more fans of the human beings as well as the athletes, which leads us to rooting for them in whatever they do beyond wrestling. Social media and sites like Flow have allowed us to know the humans, not just the athletes. And again, social media. I mean, you'll see WWE athletes, doing things in the community, whereas they don't have to put on the shtick anymore. I was watching a documentary, The Dark Side of the Ring, which is by Viceland. It was great. It did stuff about the killing of Bruiser Brody, the Fabulous Moolah, Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth. So if you have no idea what I'm saying, I'm surprised you've lasted this long in a professional wrestling angled show. So it says that, when somebody broke their neck in the ring, they had to walk around in real life with a neck brace on, the gimmick. They had to pursue the gimmick. They couldn't break kayfabe. That term kayfabe means that's the real life stuff in the ring. Whereas if you break kayfabe, you are that's Richard Flair, not Ric Flair. Richard Flair, legally spelled F-L-I-E-H-R, I believe. He's the guy riding down the street in his car. Ric Flair broke his neck in the ring. He's the Nature Boy. R-I-C-F-L-A-I-R. Just to throw that one out there, because there's so many people that are doing things like Nia Jax, excuse me. They'll get into it on Twitter as part of their storyline, but they will also get into it on Twitter with fans, but they will also do things like, community service stuff. It's this weird breaking of the fourth wall that goes back and forth. And you know what? I think we've kind of, if you understand the fact that it's entertainment, you are much more comfortable with it. Pete Kowalczyk, big-time pro wrestling fan. It's another avenue for wrestlers to use their lifelong athletic skills to make a great living. It's a tough one. Granted, we should celebrate these guys. Nick Nemeth, who is Dolph Ziggler. Chaz Betts, who is Chad Gable. Niko Bogajevic, who is Otis Dozovic. Levi Cooper, who is... What is Levi's name? He's part of Heavy Machinery with Nico. I'm going to be real bad at that. Nate Everhart from Indiana is Jason Jordan. It is an actual career path and should be encouraged. He will say this as a high school head coach. He still gets funny looks and questions when I say I enjoy pro wrestling and support it, as if it weakens, again, air quotes, real wrestling. But there's nothing I like more than my boys on national TV showcasing their abilities. Of course, Pete and Chaz Betts go way back to their days at Northern Michigan. Levi Cooper, by the way, Tucker Knight. That's the other half of Heavy Machinery. My bad, dude. I actually saw Levi at the WWE Full Sail taping one time in Orlando during the World Team Trials for Greco that the WWE Performance Center said they would let me in and do some interviews and such, and then they ghosted me. Yeah. Real good stuff there, guys. Now, moving forward, Phil Merrill, who is a longtime contributor of this program. In addition to what others have said, the rise of MMA is giving knowledge to what real fighting looks like, and it's what made the, quote, pro look more cartoonish and more obvious that it's just a show. A show that pays who have the talent. It's a sporting exhibition of athleticism. And it's male soap opera. I love it. I don't have the time to invest on 3 hours of Monday Night Raw and then SmackDown. But SummerSlam's coming up, so I'll watch that. I watch the big ones, and I pay attention to some things on social, but I can't invest the time like I used to. Anyway, Dan Rancic, it's all about the money. Can't hate on people for making some cold, hard cash. Hard to argue there. Mike Kwame, who I recently saw in Fargo and hung out with at the Olympics. Chris Willert, not pictured. Sorry, Chris. I think I threw that on Kwame's Snapchat in Fargo, too. The success the U.S. has had lately internationally helps, in my opinion. People, including myself, seem to be upset when high-level potential medal-winning wrestlers were going pro wrestling and taking their place wasn't getting done. That's not the case now. We do have depth. Alex Steen, at Alex Steen Unattached, or when pro wrestling was on TV all the time, I could scarcely watch the better kind. It used to frustrate me. I didn't want anyone helping keep that going. Now, with so much better access to good wrestling, it doesn't bother me as much. I still don't like pro wrestling, but to each their own. Veronia Wrestling, at the Twitter handle, at FreeWillyAtFlow. Wrestlers were always poor athletes and continued in the sport out of passion and personal goals. Nowadays, they are able to continue because the potential income sources. Think back to the power DuPont had over the sport just because he was a billionaire. Now we are seeing the sport as a true career opportunity for athletes on many levels due to sponsorship and, quote, volunteer coaching jobs, among other things. Having said all that, being a pro wrestler is seen as a viable option for NCAA wrestlers to generate income and a successful career. While doing something they enjoy and utilizes their skill set, there's no shame in making money. And in the past, many pros were never real wrestlers, but flooding the sport with Tier 1 athletes is good for pros and NCAA both. I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind. Again, I'm trying to get away from that term real wrestling. It's just, yes, what we do is an actual sporting competition. Again, it's a fine line because, people it's an industry there. What they're doing is a real job. So saying it's not real, I'm sensitive to that point. So again, I'm kind of beating up the point. Mark Blasco, Division II All-American back in his day. Back in the day, USA Wrestling had the term Real Wrestling, Real Heroes campaign. People accept just about anything in 2019. Yeah, USA Wrestling was not exactly the easiest to work with in that regard in that era. We even had Sandy Stevens doing the whole no bimbos speech. Anybody remember that? This is real wrestling. This is wrestling, not wrestling. No wrestlers named King Kong or Hulk. Something like that. It was interesting the first time you heard it. Our friend north of the 49th, that's Canada in case you're wondering, Eric Aslan. It's a job, and it's hard. There's nothing fake about it other than the storylines. Kind of hard to argue with that point. Nick Halverson, my coffee buddy, right around the corner here in New Brighton, at Costa Rica Nick. You wouldn't be able to tell that from his handle. Who am I to tell someone on how to make a living? Very few athletes, coaches make enough money just sticking to amateur wrestling. And no, not everyone wants to coach. You're a world-class athlete, but not good enough to make world teams, you're stuck in the middle. You know what? Another term, I keep harping on real wrestling. There's that term amateur wrestling. Once we get past college, they're not amateurs. Jordan Burroughs is a professional athlete. He is a professional wrestler. Adeline Gray, she is a professional athlete. She is a professional wrestler. Pat Smith, not the 4-time champ from Oklahoma State, but the guy who just won the Pan Am Games in Greco-Roman. Full-time professional athlete, professional Greco-Roman wrestler. The Novigrads. Now, this is not Mike. This is one of his family members. The Rock, John Cena, Dave Bautista, whatever. Some of the biggest actors in the world. It's pure entertainment. Been a fan since the Bruno Sammartino days. Yeah, that's going back in time. Saw superstar Billy Graham, Andre the Giant, you name it. Great athletes, yet it's entertainment. Think the serious athletes are all going the UFC route now. So what he's saying is that those who are looking for a real competitive type of desire, they're going to go UFC, whereas those looking to use their athletic abilities to make a living, WWE, TNA, well, TNA's dead, all AEW, All Elite Wrestling. That's a new one in case you've been under a rock for the last year or so. Guerrilla Wrestling Club at Guerrilla WC. There's an underscore actually in between Guerrilla and WC. Pro Wrestling, the product, they can make a great living. It's tough to make it through most Raws and SmackDowns now. Yeah, they are long. But it's less controversial than it was and more positive in the public eye. Yes, WWE getting away from the Attitude Era with, the gratuitous... I don't think the crotch chop was super gratuitous, but there were some times in the late 90s, the early part of this century that the WWE was really raunchy. So I think that we're more to a PG audience that, there's reality shows with divas and stuff now. I don't, what hath pro wrestling become? Anyway, Chris Willert, not in Rio, at C. Willert. The vast majority of wrestlers have to make a living doing something other than wrestling. This is a theme that we've seen throughout. Not sure while choosing pro wrestling as your career or profession should be looked at differently than any of the other things former wrestlers go on to do. Again, this is kind of, we're getting this point throughout. Danny Struck, hey, all right, it's Indiana wrestling. Pro wrestling now calls themselves entertainment. This is true. Vince McMahon says, well, we're entertainers. This is the entertainment business. One thing that's also a side note is if you hear Jim Cornette or Bruce Pritchard, Jerry Briscoe, anybody that's Eric Bischoff, anybody that's talking about their time as a booker or somebody that was in the writing side of professional wrestling, sports entertainment, they call it the business because guess what? It is a business. Now, back to what Danny was saying. Amazing athletes putting on a brutally tough show, not a competition, but then you put high-level amateurs like Dolph Ziggler, and he goes through the line. Bray Wyatt. Bray Wyatt was a Florida high school state champion. Mike Rotundo's kid. Yeah, Wyndham Rotundo is his actual name. Shelton Benjamin. Bobby Lashley. AJ Styles was a college wrestler. Back when Anderson was a junior college. And, of course, the mayor of Suplex City, Brock Lesnar. Andrew Saka. All I know is the guy pictured, I used a picture of Kurt Angle, made one of my special education students' dreams come true and gave him a lifelong memory. I've got no problem with it. That's the cool part. The Pain Project at the Pain_project. Other than money, social media and the easy access and ability to create content may also influence this. Now we see Twitter fights as we resemble WWE trash talking callouts. Example, Bros Chamizo, anything Pat Downey tweets, Gross Meredith, DeSantis. Yeah. That's, again, we're seeing a little back and forth. I did pose the question back to him if it was art imitating life or vice versa, if it's MMA borrowing from pro wrestling or who was borrowing from what now. Chase Lynn, whose memory of Fargo is a sad one. Money's money. Kimberly Archie, money bags. That's the emoji she's using. Jason Roush at Roush149. It's hard to scoff at people using their athletic talents and athletic ability to make millions. Matthew Logan. Jerry Briscoe is the catalyst for the change in the stigma, in my opinion. Damn, Jerry, you are like the king of this particular episode. Matthew Logan, thank you for throwing that one out there. Basically, and our biggest dissension so far, you've seen, I got about 40, 50 comments on this. Mike Pantelio. I think it's disgraceful as a wrestler of the mid-'80s. No high school or college wrestlers ever took to the mat with a predetermined outcome. Instead of using the sacred name of wrestling, why don't they just call it what it was, big-time brawling? Okay, again, going to understand your point, going to agree to a point, also going to disagree to a point. The birth of professional wrestling came out of catch as catch can wrestling. If I mean catch as catch can catch. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. That's where the birth of pro wrestling came up. I mean, the big matches that you heard about Mike Chapman talk about, the Hackenschmidt and Frank Gotch and things like that, those were legitimate wrestling contests back in the day. Then we got into the theatrics behind it in the 50s and 60s, and then it morphed into what we have today. So collegiate and Olympic-style wrestling and professional wrestling were, at one point, very, very close to one another. Let me give you an example. So during the Montreal Screwjob, which if you are unfamiliar with, Jim Cornette explained that, no, it was not Vince Russo that was in the mind behind screwing Bret Hart out of the WWE title his last day in the organization and while doing it in Canada. Bret Hart's Canadian, in case you're wondering. And if I'm throwing a lot of pro wrestling stuff at you that I'm slightly off on, it's not because I'm going for accuracy here. I'm just kind of doing a quick once over. So when Jim Cornette, he was the manager that toted the tennis racket around, Cornette told a story about how Strangler Lewis dropped the belt to Henri Deglaine and using something that Dan Koloff had done in another professional wrestling event overseas. Now, there's two things that are interesting about this. Two of the names I threw at you, Dan Koloff and Henri Deglaine. Both have international wrestling tournaments named after them. Both were prominent professional wrestlers back in the day. The Deglaine, as you might expect, is in France, and the Koloff is in Bulgaria. So, as I was explaining that, we got back to Mike. I can get it because Mike was coming through in an era when the only wrestling you saw on television was the NWA, the World Class Championship Wrestling, the WWF, the AWA, in the territory days, Mid-South Championship Wrestling. This is probably the overall point of this episode, is that now the curtain's been peeled back. There is no argument with somebody saying, oh, well, you try getting hit over the head with a chair and tell me if it feels real. Or the video of Dave Schultz. Not that Dave Schultz, but there's a video of Dave Schultz, the professional wrestler, slapping John Stossel over across the face when John Stossel says, well, it's fake. And Dave Schultz just basically paintbrushes him. He's like, that feel fake? That feel fake to you? Yeah. Again, the term fake has always been kind of a real sticking point, because the display of athleticism, the choreography, I think a friend of mine called them the best one-take actors in the business. And guess what? It's a business and it's entertainment. So I don't think the term actor, not what they would prefer to use, but they are going through a routine. They are going through something. And a lot of it may not even be a routine. Some of this stuff is performed on the fly. That's how well these people know one another in terms of how they work together. But back to Mike's point, he thought it was disgraceful back then because, again, that was the only thing we as a sport really said, oh, yeah, I'm a wrestler. Oh, are you on TV? Like Terry and Troy Steiner, I think one of the stories was like, oh, I saw the boys on TV the other night, the Steiner brothers. No, that's the Rex Steiners. They wrestled at Michigan, that are shortened to Rick and Scott Steiner. It's Rob and Scott Rex Steiner. But long story short, I can understand where Mike's perspective is, and that is, I think, the crux of this entire discussion. There is a shift between Mike's generation and my generation where professional wrestling no longer became scoffed at. And I don't think a lot of people have a problem with those from the 80s having a little bit of resentment about the time that professional wrestling was the only type of wrestling you could see on TV. We had great wrestling matches that we didn't have all the cable channels. We didn't have Big Ten Network. We didn't have Flow. We didn't have Track. We have avenues for everybody to get whatever they want to watch. And back then, when the only wrestling you were seeing was the stuff with the ropes and the Von Erich brothers, and you were not seeing the University of Michigan, or you were not seeing Iowa unless you lived in the state of Iowa, okay, I can get your perspective on why you don't like it. Now, times have changed. Scott Pulatik, not sure if the assumption is accurate, meaning my entire question. This guy's smart. He does Columbia-type things. Perhaps pro wrestling's popularity has increased during a time with today's 20-something-year-old wrestlers having watched it as kids, like Julia, for example. Perhaps there's not a perceived difference with respect and integrity between MMA and pro wrestling. This is also interesting because sometimes the trash talk in MMA is even more over the top than it is in scripted professional wrestling. Sports entertainment. If MMA has increasingly become more acceptable as a career option, criticism of pro wrestling comes off as distinction without much of a difference. Scott, you're a smart dude. The last comment on this show I'm going to drop at you is from the Grizz at Cal_Jack. Because it isn't pro wrestling, it's sports entertainment. LOL, in case you're wondering, that's Cal Jack. That is formerly known as Clayton Jack, the Oregon State All-American, a.k.a. Cal Bishop in the WWE NXT for a while. Yep, he's a professional wrestler. He is a superstar. Actually, if you're in the WWE, you're called a WWE superstar. I'm not sure what they call you when you're an independent on the independent level or in AEW, but dude, I'm going to get Cal Jack on the show here soon. Last time I saw him was at the convention like 2 years ago. Yeah, he was down there. So that's the discussion. Kind of a free form in terms of taking the Twitter questions. Interested in your feedback if you got something more for me, if you want to do more of these questions of the week. I'm going to throw them out there and see what sticks to the wall. Yeah, editing and talking to yourself for a half hour is an interesting way of doing things, but I like to thank everybody for contributing at Jason M. Bryant on Twitter for our next question of the week, and it'd be kind of the week. It is, what is your favorite All-Star Classic match of all time? As always, I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me, and actually, before we go, happy things to the newlywed couple, Richard Immel and the former Amanda Dahl, now House Immel. My wife and I went to West Lafayette, Indiana to check out the wedding over the weekend. I got to sit at a table with Tony Ursuland, Kevin Claunch, and his wife Elise. Had a blast, did some singing, did some consumption of beverages, and happy days to two of my really good friends. I've known Amanda and Richard for a very, very long time. Not maybe selfie humble brag just a little bit. I did introduce them. Now they're married. I will take a little bit of credit there. Little bit. Okay, they deserve all the credit. That's all I got. So happy couples, marriage, nuptials. I missed the convention because of their wedding. That's how important this thing was. Yeah. Two great people. Glad to see them, working together, and could be like a wrestling power couple, perhaps. Who knows? As always, like to thank you for spending your time with me, because you've always got time for a short time. The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Clothing. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. Hey, you know what? Did you like the show? You want to hit that subscribe button? MattTalkOnline.com/listen. Various different ways to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcatcher of choice. And if you're already subscribed, you already listened, and you love the show, and you want to support this show and this network, MattTalkOnline.com/join the team. Become a team member today.